Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about space battles in Total War Warhammer 40K. This is a big topic of conversation at the moment because of all of the things that Creative Assembly has revealed with regards to Total War 40K. They haven't talked about space battles, or very little. We know that we're going to have ships, they showed that in the trailer. We know we're going to use ships to move from planet to planet. We're going to do orbital drops. They've talked about the campaign, they've shown us the battles or portion of battles, but they haven't talked about space battles so far. And as a result of that, the big question among many people is whether or not Creative Assembly would even do space battles. There's all kinds of arguments being brought forward with regards to IP rights, licensing, and even just from a gameplay standpoint. So I just want to address those various points. And let's start with the licensing process. Yes, when you look at the Total War 40K license, they clearly have the Ultramarines and the rights to that. They may even have the rights to Calgar. They do have the rights to various factions in the 40K universe, and they probably have rights to every single major faction in the 40K universe, because otherwise they wouldn't have done a Game of the Year reveal, which is very expensive for them to do. Getting David Harbour to announce it is not cheap at the Game of the Year award show. The fact they decided to go down that path indicates to me that they're spending a lot of money on this game. And we do know, financially speaking, that Creative Assembly has revenue, yearly revenue of hundreds of millions of dollars, give or take. Could be 200 million, could be 300 million per year, but they are certainly making a lot of money on that. And most of that money is being spent at the moment on working on new games. So you're thinking about Alien Isolation 2, you're thinking about Medieval 3, but I imagine a huge portion of the budget is being spent currently on Total War 40K. So from a licensing standpoint, I am skeptical of any claim from people saying that they wouldn't do it just because of the licensing process. An interesting thing about the licensing process, Games Workshop does deliberately split how they handle various aspects of 40K. So space battles are one thing, ground combat is another thing, various factions, another thing. Years ago, what Games Workshop would do is they would give various video game companies the rights to, say, use one Space Marine chapter or another. That's how we got the Blood Ravens and Dawn of War. That's how we got even a Space Wolf video game, for instance, or a Grey Knight video game with Cascade Demon Hunters. So all those things have been true in the past, but things have changed. And right now, Games Workshop works differently than they did before. I mean, we are going to have both the Blood Ravens and Dark Angels in Dawn of War 4. We're going to have the Adeptus Mechanicus. We're going to have the Necrons. We're going to have, apparently, 2 greenskin leaders in Dawn of War 4. So, very important distinction between how Games Workshop used to handle things and how they handle things right now. But then we also have to talk about it from the perspective of video game publishers. Because when you look at video game publishers, the people who own the rights to space battles from a video game perspective, or who Games Workshop gave a license to make video games focused on space battles in 40K, are Focus Entertainment, the same publisher behind Space Marine 2. And thing about Space Marine and Dawn of War and Captain Titus is that all of those are owned by Sega, because Sega bought THQ, they bought the rights to Dawn of War, Titus, Blood Ravens. I mean, that's how we got Dawn of War free. So Focus Entertainment would not have been able to do Space Marine 2 if they hadn't had some agreement, to what degree I couldn't say, but they needed to have some agreement with Sega. Same with the Deep Silver to do Dawn of War 4, they needed the rights from Sega. It could have been something as boring as Games Workshop interacting with Sega, reaching an agreement. It's like, okay, we want these rights, here's what we're going to give in return. Or it could have been a lot more complicated. Licensing agreements can be a bit of a mess. But Sega certainly would have wanted something in return for that. And we know they're betting big, and certainly Creative Assembly is betting big on Total War 40K. And because Focus Entertainment did have that license for Space Battles for Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2, I would believe that they are going to do, that they have the license at least to do Space Battles in 40K for Total War. Whether or not they do so is another matter, but one of the things I would point out on this subject is if you look at the ship designs in the trailer compared to Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2, well, they look very similar. I mean, the battle barge is a bit different, but really only from the perspective that the battle barge has a big cannon on its prow. But if you look at the other ships, they look very similar to what we got in Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2. And there was even a scene where they showed the Retribution class battleship next to a battle barge, and it looked pretty much the same as it does in Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2. Now, that's of course ship designs. Whether or not they have the rights to make space battles is a different discussion. But my point here is the way Games Workshop has handled things in the past is not the way they are handling things right now. And given the rights that Sega has, and the fact that Focus Entertainment would have needed access to those rights to make Space Marine 2, is similar to how Deep Silver needed the rights for Dawn of War 4, I would believe that any kind of licensing argument doesn't really hold true. Now, that doesn't mean that we will get Space Battles in Total War 40K. That's a different discussion, and it comes down to the question, does Creative Assembly want to do them? Can they do them? And that is where I feel like we've just traveled 10 years in the past, really. Because right now there's a bunch of people saying, well, it would be too complicated, it would be too difficult, and they're not going to do it because it's Creative Assembly. Those are similar arguments to what people used back before Warhammer 1 was fully revealed. We knew they were going to reveal Total War Warhammer 1. We didn't know the specifics. So the arguments back then were around single entity units, legendary lords or heroes, flying units, magic, etc. A lot of people were skeptical that Creative Assembly would do that. And then they did all of those things. And they went even further because one may not remember this, but back then, before the release of Warhammer 1, and this is what sets Warhammer 1 apart, the big discussion was whether or not they would actually do a game that would run better, 64-bit engine. And Warhammer 1 did that. The performance gain from Warhammer 1 compared to all other Total War games was significant. Now they're doing a new engine with very different things, destruction, physics destruction. They've talked about how, you can drop Space Marines and drop pod on a building, destroy the building, and then use the remains that are underground as cover. We are going to have a cover system in the game. They specifically mentioned that. So my belief on this subject is whether or not Creative Assembly wants to do space battles, I think they're betting big on whatever they're doing with Total War 40K. Now, does that mean we would have space battles at the launch of the game? Maybe, maybe not. What is worth pointing out from the leaks we've had is that Creative Assembly had been working on a World War I game that they then canceled. But what has been mentioned is that Creative Assembly, what Valrak mentioned specifically, is that Creative Assembly was looking to implement dogfighting from that World War I game into Total War 40K. And that it probably wouldn't be there at launch. Obviously, dogfighting can be very important in a space battle situation. So they might not release space battles with the launch of the game, and then release them at the same time as they release ground-based dogfighting. The reason they would do so is because you obviously want fighters in space engaging with one another properly. So the same system that they can use for ground battles or land battles for aerial fighters engaging with one another is the same system that they can use for space battles as well, with various ship-to-ship fighters and bombers, interceptors, going at it against one another. So we might not get space battles at the launch of the game, or maybe they're trying to figure out if they can do it or not. But I believe Creative Assembly is looking at it. I think the evidence points in that direction. Whether or not they do so, or when they do so, that is the big question mark. I see no reason whatsoever they couldn't do so, and honestly, space battles, compared to everything else they're doing, a new engine, land battles, interactions between land and galactic layer and planets, how you interact with each planet, the various systems, believe it or not, those are actually a lot more complicated than Creative Assembly doing space battles. It might not happen at the beginning. Now, some people have talked about, well, what about boarding actions or setting our armies on an asteroid or something and fighting it out against one another? I think that would be silly. I think boarding actions could be interesting. Like, ships in 40K are huge, like gigantic. You can have proper wars inside of them. So I think it would be a cool mechanic, but it shouldn't be the main way you interact in space between your faction and another faction. But of course, that begs the question, though. Will we actually interact with factions from one planet to another? That is the big question. Or will planets be self-contained? So you'll have various factions on a planet, and you'll be fighting for that planet, and then you move on to another planet. Those are the discussion points at the moment, because there's some interesting tidbits that Creative Assembly has revealed with regards to their campaign structure. But that's all I had to say for the moment. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. I don't believe there is any reason whatsoever from a licensing perspective or gameplay perspective that would hold back Creative Assembly from doing space battles, at least directly. But the question is the interaction of your armies, planets, and space assets. That would be the big question, because it's all well and cool to talk about space battles in a self-contained universe, but how do all of these systems interact with one another? And one of the key problems of Total War is how units or how armies interact with one another in battle versus how the campaign layer works. So that interaction is so very crucial from my view. Costin here, signing out.